So go ahead and put your questions there. And then when we get to the Q&A, I'll go ahead and select from those questions. I also believe that the writers would like to ask some questions of each other, right? So I think that that what we'll do is we'll let each person read, and then I'll let those questions, I'll let Kevin and Lauren ask some questions of each other, and then we'll go ahead with audience questions. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Yeah? Okay. All right, so let me introduce both writers first, right? And then we'll go ahead and we'll let Kevin read first, followed by Lauren. So Kevin Brockmeier is the author of the memoir, A Few Seconds of Radiant Film Strip, the novels The Illumination, The Brief History of the Dead, and The Truth About Celia. The story collection is Things That Fall from the Sky and The View from the Seventh Layer, and the children's novels City of Names and Grooves, A Kind of Mystery. His work has been translated into 17 languages. He teaches frequently at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he lives in Little Rock, Arkansas, where he was raised. Lauren Groff is a two-time National Book Award finalist and the New York Times bestselling author of the novels The Monsters of Templeton, Arcadia, Fates and Furies, and the short story collection Delicate Edible Birds and Florida. She's won the Story Prize and has been a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Groff's work regularly appears in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and elsewhere, and she was named one of Grant's 2017 Best Young American Novelists. Welcome to you both. I know we're all thrilled to have you be talking with us today. But let's get into readings. Kevin, you're going to read to us from your new book, The Ghost Variations.
Yeah? Yes. So thank you, Jeff, for moderating us. Thanks to the festival for inviting us. Thank you to Lauren for participating. This is her second time at the festival, I think. The last time was in person. I wish this time could be in person as well. But I'm delighted to be sharing a screen with you, even if I can't actually share a room with you. So that Lauren does not have to boast on her own behalf. I should mention that she is now a three-time National Book Award finalist. Her latest
I made
book,
the motion.
Yes, but in case anybody missed it. So, now you know. I am not always adept at predicting these things, but I think Matrix certainly deserves to win the National Book Award, and I'll be rooting for you. Lauren and I met in 2008, I believe, in person for the first time at the LA Times Book Festival. And the last time we saw each other in person was, I think, about 4 years ago, when just by chance we were sharing a flight to Gainesville, Florida, which is where Lauren lives, and where my brother and his family live, and where my dad once lived. Now he's in Arkansas. In any case, I'm going to read to you a handful of stories from the Ghost Variations. This is a book of 100 very short stories, all of them orienting themselves around ghosts, ghostliness, or the afterlife in one way or another. I've read from this book at the festival before. So the two stories that I've pre-selected, and I might roll a die to see if there's a third story, are stories that I've not only never read at the festival, but never read out loud in any setting before. I'm hoping that sooner or later, as I read gradually from this book at one event after another, eventually I will have read all 100 stories out loud. But I'm going to begin today with one of the more, when people talk about ghost stories, they often, the first thing that comes to mind are frightening stories that you might hear around a campfire. And most of these stories are not stories of that type. But I thought that a few of them ought to be actually frightening. And so the first story I want to read is my attempt to write one of those truly horrifying stories. And, I hope it worked out that way. This is number 46 out of the 100, and it's called Playtime. 1, stay inside after dark. 2, in daylight, keep to the fields and the plazas. 3, if you see the shadow of a person without the body of a person, do not cross its borders, for it is a ghost. These were the rules the people of the village observed, though they might with more accuracy have been called alarms, admonitions, warnings. So grave were they, and so pregnant with consequence. Even the most gentle and loving of parents smacked, shook, and spanked them into their children. Accidents nevertheless happened. Take the girl trapped right now in the glade beyond the village border, who is waiting for the sun to go down. In her 14 years, she must have seen the shadows of 1,000 ghosts, scissory gray shapes that have appeared on the walls of buildings or the dirt between one house and another, vibrating with an expansive scorn. She was only 3 the day a neighbor of hers was seized by one of them, and she still remembers the horror of it. A man in blue overalls misstepping into a wandering shadow, then his shout as it transformed him or consumed him, or whatever it was that ghosts did to leave a heap of clothing where a body had been. She knows how to evade the ghosts when the sun is shining. She knows how to flee indoors when the evening comes. The problem is her dog, a rambunctious black and white spaniel, all tail and skull and ears, who puffs and barks at the door whenever he judges himself deserving of a walk. He is a rattle-brained little thing, and she loves him, which is why, earlier that afternoon, when he spurted off into the woods in pursuit of a squirrel, she let her instincts get the better of her. Without thinking, she went lunging in after him, grasping for his leash as it snaked through the undergrowth. The light fell here and there through the foliage. Ranks of black trunks rushed past her like fence posts. Before she knew it, he was gone with a startled yelp, taken by what had seemed to be the outline of a maple on the ground. And there she was, deep in the forest, holding his leash and collar. By luck, she had staggered to a stop in a patch of sunshine, but the trees around her laid down a maze of shadows, far too many for her eyes to disentangle. And the danger of venturing back into them sapped the strength from her legs. What could she do but stand at the center of the clearing, willing herself to take a few steps every 10 minutes or so, as the patterns of darkness the branches made in the dirt slid slowly, excruciatingly, toward the east. Not far away, gathering at the edges of the glade, were dozens of holes in the likeness of bodies. At dusk, she knows, the sun will paint their shadows in long black stripes to the horizon. Eventually, their borders will become impossible to distinguish. We call this night. The ghosts call it playtime. So that was the creepy story. This one is a little gentler, although it does have a twist at the end. I thought it would be an appropriate story to read today because I'm being accompanied by Lauren, whose latest novel is in part about what it is like to discover yourself in possession of religious faith. So this is story number 88, and it's called Prayer from an Airport Terminal. One day, a young man of meager religious faith doubted he had the strength to do what was necessary and so decided, against all his instincts, to pray, and to pray as forthrightly as he could. If there's a God out there who values my well-being, I admit I would be surprised. I can't even say that I actually believe this will work, but I'm praying as sincerely as I know how. I'm speaking, I suppose, not to God, but to anyone who cares enough about me to listen. I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble and I need help. Please help me. As it happened, the ghost of the man's grandfather, like many ghosts, enjoyed eavesdropping now and then on the thoughts of his descendants. Characteristically, he had found, the minds of the living were a confusing ragbag of stray phrases, half-formed wishes, and flickering sense impressions that vibrated with color for barely an instant before they bleached out and disappeared. But every so often, one of his children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren would experience a thought so unmixed that it rose up and penetrated the turmoil. A piece of music could cause it, a strong kiss, a car crash. And that's what the young man's prayer was, a kind of car crash. That the ghost heard it so clearly was a sign of its, the prayer's, desperation. Help me, the boy kept repeating. Help me. So much fear and pain compressed inside the words that the ghost's sympathy was kindled. Though he was not truly fit to answer prayers, no ghost is, he did what he could, dispatching a warm gust of concentrated emotion into the world. You'll be all right. Instantly, his grandson felt better. The kindness of his gesture, the ghost would never doubt. Its wisdom, though, he soon enough would. For it was upon answering his grandson's prayer that the ghost's difficulties truly began. The problem was that the young man believed he had found God. An unshakable confidence in the power of prayer had been awakened inside him. 2, 12, 50 times a day, encountering the most mild obstacle or frustration, he would silence all his other thoughts and send out a petition for help. Dear God, thising, and dear God, thating. Dear God, please let these trucks get out of the passing lane. Dear God, please keep the kids from using up the shampoo. Sometimes the ghost was able to soothe his grandson's worries, sometimes not. But whenever his prayers were ignored, the boy became exasperated, mulish, braying more and more loudly for attention. Enough, the ghost thought. Enough of this endless sadness. Enough of this endless pain. Once, instead of transmitting a message of comfort, he tried transmitting a message of aggravation. Leave me alone. But this only made matters worse, generating a long procession of neurotic forgive me prayers. Then and there, the ghost realized he was trapped. Imagine it, knowing that for the next 50 or 60 years, someone will resort to you and you alone to quench his troubles. He felt the way the junk must feel about the junkie. And one more that I have not planned in advance. So when I was writing this book, I had a totem object that I kept on my desk. This is it. It's a 100-sided die called a Zocchihedron. It's roughly the size of a golf ball. It has beads or seeds of some kind inside of it to give it some friction and keep it from just rolling endlessly away. So one of the things I wanted to do when I published this book and began reading from it was just roll the die at my readings and see what story it suggested to me and then read that particular story. So that's what I'm going to do. It'll be the last story. And it is story number 5. And this is another one I've never read before. It's called Amnesia. The luminous strangers offer their hands to her. With kindness and pity, they say, do not be frightened. And she is not frightened. They say, you will not remember us. And she does not remember them. You've returned, they assuage her. That's the important thing. Their faces are like sunlight on water, 1,000 tumbling jacks of white and silver. They gather around her so closely and in such shifting numbers that she worries, or rather she ought to worry. She designates worry as a possibility, that they will crush her. But their bodies ride the air so weightlessly, and she feels so weightless among them that she trusts they will not do so. By what turn she might have arrived here, what alleyway or open door, she cannot recollect. It occurs to her that she is not wearing the shoes that she put on this morning, nor, it would seem, the dress or the jacket. She took the subway to work, that she is sure of. The motor was out at the terminal, and she had to climb the escalator as though it were an ordinary staircase. But the cleated steps, with their strange distribution of measurements, a little too deep and a little too tall, along with the curving metal fins of the risers, made her feel as if she was scaling the teeth of some enormous saw. For a moment, she thought the tunnel's exit had gone topsy-turvy, and she was climbing down instead of up. A dizziness at the temples, a gust of warm air, and suddenly all around her, the luminous strangers. They swaddle her now on every side, including, improbably, above and below. The sky, the ground, are bright with their faces, ablaze. Their features are so changeable that if they do not fuse together, she thinks, they will surely burn apart. But they do not fuse together. They do not burn apart. Instead, they ripple. The luminous strangers say, we are your brothers and sisters. And they are exactly that, her brothers and sisters. They say, soon you will feel at home here again. And she does feel at home there, even, she is willing to believe, again. They say, one day, presently, you will understand. And one day, presently, she does. She was alive for a while, and before that she was not. And now she is not, all over again. But the non-being from which she emerged and the post-being into which she has graduated are not quite the same. Nor is she the same privileged spirit she used to be, lulled by the comforts of home, so sure that, unlike the others, she would awaken one day and remember where she had come from. So that is a story that is a little more generous to its ghost than the other two I read. And so I'm glad that the die offered that one up as my final story. So thank you. And let me hand it over to Lauren Groff for a reading.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin. We have to imagine the 72 audience members giving you a raucous round of applause right now. Okay, so yeah, Lauren, please read for us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so grateful to be here today and to be reading with Kevin, whose work I love so much. I don't know if you know this, but I read this in manuscript, Kevin, and my mind was blown. I love it so much, and I wanted to talk to you at the time, just like sit you down and talk to you. So we have today, and maybe some other time we can talk about these ghosts. So I'm going to read a little bit from this section that I haven't read yet. So it's a long story what Matrix is about, but the short version of the story is that it is sort of a retelling of Marie de France, the imagined life of this very real, actual figure who's the first published female poet in French. But I kind of wanted to talk about the current day world sort of slant, and so I'm dealing with a lot of ideas and things that were really urgent to me at the time. But all you need to know about this section that I'm about to read is that my Marie, my main character, has very reluctantly become a prioress of an abbey that's kind of starving. And this is like a little adventure near the beginning of her time there. So after Easter is the hungriest time, between the last of the winter stores and before the bounty of the garden. A family of peasants, tired of starving, steals winter rye from the abbey's fields a half-day's ride away and bakes the rye into bread. But there's a disease in the grain, or perhaps it is cursed by the devil, and after eating it, some dance uncontrollably and sing naked in the streets. Others scream with terrifying visions. Others go stiff and barely breathe. Nothing can drive out the disease, not praying, not bathing them in holy water, not tying them to their beds, not leaping out from the night to frighten them, not holding them by the ankle in the cold river, not beating them around the head with a yew branch, not burying them crown to toe in warm manure, not hanging them upside down from a high tree and spinning them until they vomit, not drilling a tiny hole through their skulls to let the bad humors out of their brains. The rumor spreads that the abbey's lands are stalked by the devil, that those who eat of the abbey's land are taking the devil into their bodies. Ah, Abbess Emmy says, hearing past the music to the predicament, and mutters that it's a short leap from the abbey's grain going unsellable to the sisters themselves being agents of the devil. Nuns already are suspect, unnatural, sisters to witches. She bids the horses be readied. She and Marie will ride out to exorcise the fields. A fine morning, haze where the tops of the grasses touch the air. Marie watches the way the wind-swept landscape empties into a great, dark forest pressing tight to the abbey's closest fields. Then above the treetops there looms a giant man-made arch, as soon glimpsed as lost. When Marie makes a low noise in wonder, the abbess says, "Yes, Romans, something to carry water, I think." She hums her song again, and Marie marvels at the kind of people so magnificent they can create something to last 1,000 years beyond their lives. Humanity must be disintegrating to dust, the people of today paltry in comparison with what they had been a millennium before. The Romans, the Greeks, such giants compared with the Normans, or far worse, the paltry, brittle-boned English. In 1,000 more years, humans will be as thoughtless as the cud-chewing kine of the fields. She longs to be among the greats of the generations before. Marie might have discovered others like herself in that era. She would not have felt so alone. They arrive at the blighted fields near dusk. Marie and the abbess dismount and sing a shortened vespers as the villagers draw close. They go into the house where the family lies in panting rigidity. One girl's eyelids are peeled back, her eyeballs jutting from her skinny face as though she's staring at a demon dancing on the sooty ceiling. The abbess blesses each afflicted person, then has Marie lead her into the fields. Emma orders torches held unlit circling the diseased rye, and shovels and rakes carried by each body capable of using them. Then a marvelous transformation overcomes the abbess. She sharpens. She grows beyond the boundaries of her thin body. She stands in the very last shock of daylight through the trees, so that her pale face glows visible to those even a furlong away. She raises her arms. Her voice grows deep and loud, and she intones a prayer in Latin that Marie has never before heard or read. When the abbess shouts Amen and nods, Marie touches her torch to those on either side of her, and each person runs to light the next torch, and on the fire goes in the deepening darkness until the field is encircled in points of light. At last the abbess gives a cry and brings her arms down, and all lower the torches to the fields. The greasy rye goes up quickly, the rabbits and nesting birds unloose. A screeching vole darts past Marie, and she runs it down and kills it with her clog because its little body is licked with flames. At last the fire, which the shovels keep from blowing into the unblighted fields, burns itself to embers, and the abbess and prioress kneel and pray through the night. Everyone else steals off in the darkness to sleep. The two nuns stay in the smoldering fields praying until the smoke clears with dawn. Marie is chilled to shuddering. Her body aches everywhere. She hates such unnecessary suffering with a powerful hatred. To take her mind off the pain and the night, she prayed for each of her sisters one by one, each nun's flaws blazing bright. Slowly, she decides that instead of the abbess's practice of assigning work according to what the nuns do well as a lesson in humility, Marie will assign work due to strength. No more sickly nuns coughing in the fields or weakly hanging up the wet-washed sheets. No more Goda ministering to disputations. No more milking done by weeping, terrified Sister Lucy, whose sister was killed by a heifer kick to the head. So many hours have been forever lost through feebleness and reluctance. There is nothing wrong, she thinks, in taking pride in the work of one's body. She has never been convinced by any argument for abasement. Surely God, who has done all the good work, wants work to be done well. At last a rim of sun appears, and Marie helps the abbess off her knees and half carries the older woman to the cottage where the horses had been kept. The abbess gives final instructions. Only wheat will be planted in the fields for 3 years. A great wooden cross shall be erected on the north side to keep the devil off. The woman of the household takes the abbess's cold hands in her own and chafes them until Emma has stopped her shivering. They have given the food they brought from the abbey to the starving people of the village and ride off hungry. When they are long out of earshot, Marie asks the abbess where she learned to exorcise fields. No book she knows holds such a ceremony in it. The abbess is exhausted and pale. She smiles and says, of course I made it up. Ritual creates its own catharsis, Marie. Mystical acts create mystical beliefs. And then, lulled by the rocking of her fat little horse, the abbess falls asleep. In this, Marie catches a gleam of the true purpose of the night. Women in this world are vulnerable. Only reputation can keep them from being crushed. This abbess, who found herself unmoved by her own nun's starvation, was alarmed to action by the threat of dark gossip. Okay. That's where I'm going to stop for today. Oh, yeah, thanks. Silent clapping.
No, that was great. I love that scene. It's one of many, I think, where Marie starts to learn how to use her power when she sees what the abbess does and how she handles that moment. So yeah, it's a wonderful scene. So let's open things up to the questions that you two might have had for each other. And Kevin, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, of course. I have a couple that I had in mind. And, I really do. I regret that this event could not have taken place in person because I enjoy simply sitting over coffee with Lauren and chatting so much. So I thought that I would offer up a couple questions that I think the audience will find intriguing, but that I would also have asked you, certainly, if we had been together in person. And I guess maybe the first one I'd like to ask is about the music that's inside this book, which is to say, when I was reading Matrix, I had the sense in the opening section that what I was receiving was a single extended lyric line, and that you were going to be able to sustain that line from the beginning to the end of the book. And you kind of do. It shifts a little bit after kind of that opening section, but I was trying to think of how I could describe this, because it does feel to me as if there is some kind of music that's behind everything, that the book is pursuing in addition to all of the other work it's doing. And what happens eventually is that that music it remains sustained from the beginning to the end, but something starts flickering behind it, so that our reception of the music is disrupted a little bit in the closing sections of the book. I admire the prose here so tremendously, and yet it's very different. I think of myself as a sentence by sentence writer. Like, that's the kind of work, and I strive for a kind of music inside my books too. And yet the music you create here is so different from the kind of music I was trying to create inside the ghost stories, which is all about kind of stopping and starting and punctiliation. And like, at most, sentences sort of swaying very slightly alongside each other. But it's never about like one line of lyric that's being introduced and sustained from the beginning to the very end. So, I mean, that was just, I guess, a discourse rather than a question. But my question is this, this is as far as my understanding is that this is the first book-length work of deep past historical fiction you've written. You've written historical fiction set in the much more recent past. And I was wondering, like, how setting a story in that earlier time, what changes it brought to your style or to the prose you found yourself writing?
This is the most amazing question anyone has ever asked. And I'm so happy it's you, because you are such a musician. And actually, that's one of the things that I go back to your work over and over again to listen to and to sort of hear past the surface words and into what's going on musically, rhythmically in the basement of the work, I guess. I cannot write a book, even if I've had it on my mind for 10, 15 years, until I hear the underlying music. And I think that's probably the same with you too, or at least for a lot of people. I think I try and I fail and I try and I fail and I try and I fail over and over again until whatever that long lyrical line is. And I think that for me, with a novel, novels are amazing because you can play around with form the whole way through. You can compress and telescope time. You can come into it almost like it's very tactile, right? It's like, for me, it is a more tactile form possibly than even the short story, because it allows some moments of really deep slowness. I'm thinking of the cetology chapter in Moby Dick, for instance, right? Like a really deep, slow, almost essayistic part where he's just talking about like scientific theories of whales. But the novel's so large, it can encompass this, but it has to also have the resonance underneath, the sort of vibration underneath. And so this happens in like multiple layers, right? So it's not just lyrical, it's not just on the surface of the sentence, which is something that we both pay great attention to, but it's something underneath, right? It's like an ongoing thread that you're trying to hear the whole way through, and it is oral, right? It's something that's like it's happening under the surface of the sentences. And then in this particular case too, I have envisioned this as a standalone, very deeply itself, like whole thing. But it's also in a triptych of 3 books that are sort of tracking very similar ideas, even if the circumstances and the language of each book is very different. So this first book is, 12th century England, sort of moving in and out of registers of French, English, Old English, Latin, right? All of these things are sort of mixed in, very, very tumbled together. So the sentences had to be mixed French, Old English, Latin, and really kind of twisted and turned in order to create its own sort of music. The next one is 1609 in the Americas, and so it's got a very Elizabethan language and rhythms to it. But so the third one is now. But each even though the language is very different, and I think the sentences in the third one are closer to maybe your sentences in the Ghost Variations. They're like shorter. They're sort of like they're very playful. They twist at the end a little bit. There's like a flick at the end, which you're trying to get at a lot of the sentences. There's still this really deep music, almost unhearable music that's I want to be similar throughout. And it's one of those things that like it's almost impossible to talk about, right? It's like to identify and to figure out what exactly it is that one is doing, which is why it takes so long to write a novel. I think you just keep listening and sort of trying to refine your ear until you find it. You find that thing. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, lovely. All right. So, as you were reading, the biggest question to me came back to me, and this is, I mean, I have a list of like 30. Well, we won't get to all of them. But I think when I think about ghosts, I think that particularly with this book, you do such an incredible job of really talking through the philosophical ideas of what a ghost is in fiction, right? So I think that what fiction does best is not answer questions, but poses questions over and over. And those questions through the fiction get fragmented into further questions. And so the largest question to me is what is a ghost, right? I mean, that is the foundational question, which I think is your foundational question in this project, perhaps. I have a physicist friend who says a ghost is just like a fold in time, where time comes together and people can see through it. I believe that a ghost is the place, because the ghosts are very much place related, a place and a person sort of remembering together, or their memories interact in a sort of alchemical way. But what do you, I mean, this could probably take like 30 minutes for you to answer, but what are ghosts? What is a ghost?
Well, one of the delights of the book for me was being able to pose that question again and again and present theoretical answers without ever actually adopting one of them. And so that's what I tried to do. I'm sure that there are approaches to ghostliness that some of these stories share with some of the others. But what I hoped was that it would never settle on an absolute answer for that question, but present it over and over again. I am fascinated by ideas of time. And this is a book that's suffused with stories about time and tries to disrupt it and utilize it in different ways. And there are more traditional hauntings in the book that are wedded to one place or to one character or another. What I was most interested in, I think, and forgive me if anybody in the audience has kind of been to one of my events and heard me say this in like almost exactly the same words before, but I gave a reading alongside the fiction writer Adam Ehrlich Sachs. He was a wonderful writer. He was publicizing his book Inherited Disorders, which is a collection of very short stories, all about the sons of successful fathers who struggle to come to terms with that success and what they're meant to do in the wake of it. And he happened to say in conversation that he was thinking about Faulkner's idea that all great literature is about the human heart in conflict with itself. And that whether or not his book was great literature, he couldn't say, Adam couldn't say. But he felt that what it was actually about was the human brain in conflict with itself. And I thought about kind of that formulation, and I was convinced that if I played with language enough, I was in the middle of writing this book at the time, that I would come up with a formulation that suited this material and explained what it was I was trying to do with these stories. And I think ultimately this is a book that is what it's like for human being to be in conflict with itself, which is not to say human beings, as in people, but what it's like for being and non-being to announce themselves inside the context of a single story. like that's what I think most of the stories in this book were about in one way or another. The kind of tension between the ways in which we're attracted to being and the ways in which we're attracted to non-being. And ghosts are a very good lens through which to examine that aspect of the human experience. Now, not all of the stories are actually about human beings. And like some of the ones that I liked the best were either more idea driven or about other forms of consciousness, alien consciousness, plant consciousness, or animal consciousness specifically. But basically, I thought when I was writing the book that it would be a way that ghosts could be a way of writing about absolutely everything that I was interested in. And like, I hope that it worked out that way. Like more broadly, there's a quotation, and I think I've got a copy of like the interview here with me. But I might not be able to find it. There was a quotation from Carlyle, I think, like writing, I can't remember like what book it was he was writing about, but he was quoting from another book, which suggested that like if a ghost is an entity that does not exist, flickers inexplicably and briefly into an existence it should not possess, and then disappears from that existence once again, then human beings, as we always encounter them, are in fact ghosts. It's just that the time scale is different. Like we're examining them over the course of, 60, 70, 80, 100 years. But within the context of eternity, that is, of course, only the briefest flicker. And therefore, we should really think of ourselves as ghosts, just like any other ghost. And I do like that idea as well.
Is that the idea you feel closest to? Is that what you personally, your philosophy would be closest to?
Yes, I think that would be fair to say, that I feel a lot of intimacy with kind of that particular idea of ghostliness.
Oh, I love it.
Let me ask you, if we were sitting down together over coffee in person, I think mostly we would talk about the books that we had been reading. Like that's usually the conversation that we have. And it's a conversation I'm always very excited to have.
Yes.
So that was the second question I wanted to make sure that I got the chance to ask you, which are, what are the books you have read this year that you have loved the most?
I read a lot of books. These are the ones that, these I actually came equipped. So this is the one that I think is going to blow up next year. I love Hernan, and I love this book so much. And Hernan Diaz's Trust. It is brilliant. His In the Distance really changed my reading when I read it, and I actually like sought his friendship because of it, because I loved it so much. He's brilliant. Trust is so good. It's so good. And then this one I just had sent to me by McNally Press. McNally Jackson started a press. It's called They by, Kevin, this is such a book for you. I'm going to send it to you. By Kay Dick. It was written in 1977, and this is like a reissue. Lucy Scholes did the foreword or the afterword for this. It is so weird and amazing. It's I don't know if you've heard of it. It's so good. I'm only this far in, but so there's this nebulous they. And the they is really like very, very dark, and they're doing terrible things. But what those things are not very clear, and who they are is not very clear. But there's just this like pervasive like dread and terror. It's amazing. It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah,
it's
that sounds like something I would love. I don't know the writer, but yeah.
Yeah, no, apparently this is like such a one-off for her. Like she was writing these, very British, cozy tales, and then something big happened in her life, like things blew up, and she wrote this one-off book that's just like mind-blowingly good. It's so good so far. So yeah, so it reminds me in like a non-funny Mrs. Caliban in some ways, which is such a great book.
Yeah.
But so this year too, I went into like basically a Roberto Bolaño warpole, where all I did was like read and reread Bolaño. And so especially Of course, 2666. Like, I read it when it first came out. I was not prepared at the moment for it as. I mean, I loved it, but right now in the middle of the pandemic, that was the time for this book. And I still feel guilty and complicit in having read it and having been part of evil. I mean, like, it's the most amazing book, but also his By Night in Chile. I think I've read it 10 times this year alone to try to understand how he does what he does in that. And I don't understand. I have to read it 100 more times to get it. How about you? No, you tell me what you're into.
Okay, so among the best books I've read this year, have you read or heard about Strange Beasts of China? She's a Chinese novelist, Yan Gay. Ge is how the last name is spelled. It came out. I think the American edition came out midsummer. I bought it like 6 months earlier, the British edition. But I had been curious about this book, having heard about it some time back without having an English translation available. And it just kind of knocked me out. Like the way I've been describing it to people, it's sort of as if you have a Borgesian register of unusual beasts that are described almost encyclopedically, combined with something like the kind of very contemporary relationship stories of Sally Rooney. And this seems like the most unusual combination imaginable, like set in a Chinese village. But it works so splendidly. It was one of the books I was most pleased to discover this year. I've read everything else by her that's available in English now, which isn't much. Only, I think, 3 other very, very short volumes. But this is the masterpiece of those. I read a Danish novel by Olga Ravn called The Employees. Do you know this one? This was another one I adored. I imported it from Britain, but there's an American edition coming out in January, I think. The subtitle is A Workplace Novel of the 22nd Century, but it's The Employees. And the idea is that it's like a series of workplace testimonies to some sort of board who's investigating something that's gone wrong on a generation ship that is kind of traversing the galaxy in search of another planet, an inhabitable other planet. And some of the beings on this vessel are actual human beings, and some of them are artificially created. They stop off at a planet, retrieve some artifacts from that planet, and something about these artifacts begins making all of the people on board this vessel yearn to be back on Earth. The ones who have been there and the ones who never have, both, which disrupts kind of the routines that they're actually supposed to be instituting, like to make this trip across the galaxy. I read someone describe it as the movie Alien if it had been scripted by Samuel Beckett. And I think, okay, that's it. Like, I'm just going to borrow that because it's perfect. It's perfect. Can Kevin repeat the title of the Generation Ship book? I saw it pop up in the chat. So that's The Employees. And the author's name is Olga Ravn, Olga-Ravn. She's a Danish novelist. This is the first of her books to be translated into English. So those are 2 of the books I've loved this year. Lauren, you're one of I read a lot. Most people say to me, like, you read more than anybody I know. You read more than I do. Like, you're one of my few friends, like, read more than I do. And I always wish, all the books I read, any given year, it's maybe 30 or 40 of them that are essential to me. And that that my life would have been impoverished if I had not discovered. And you just can't know what those books are going to be ahead of time. So you have to do lots more reading if you hope to discover them. But those were two of mine. And I've got to say, like, I know that everybody in the audience probably is already familiar with your work. But just in case they're not, Matrix is absolutely one of those essential books for me. No. It's so gorgeously accomplished. And I hope everybody who is listening in today buys a copy of the book if they haven't already. Like, the fact that a book such as that can be on the New York Times bestseller list like it gives me, I don't know, like a kind of renewed confidence in the possibility of the American literature consumer. Because it's just, you don't often see great books that actually attract that kind of readership.
That's so kind. I actually think that it's very, very weird. Like Ann Patchett looked at me and she's like, "You write really weird books." I'm like, those are the books that I love the most, like the Ghost Variations, right? Like, you have to admit, this is a really like amazingly strange book in a great, great way.
I appreciate that. Yeah. But it's further and further from the center of what the American reading public is interested in. Alas, I'm afraid. Like, I'm just gravitating far, far away. But
I think it's got legs. This is like a book that people will read alongside Bolaño and Calvino, right? Like, I think like you will be on so many college like reading lists, syllabi for their, particularly, I love all of your work, but particularly like this one, it's fragmented philosophy in a way that I'm hungry for, right? Like I want this so badly. And I'm trying to think of any other book recently that I've read like this, and I can't think of anything like this. I mean, nothing, right? Like it sort of stands alone in the wilderness, in the beautiful wilderness, like a ghost, like wait, what did you call it? A luminous stranger, right? Like I love that. You said it 3 times in that story, and I was like, just keep saying it. It's the most beautiful phrase I've ever heard. Luminous stranger, luminous stranger.
Thank you.
I wanted to just follow up on some of those questions. Laura and I wholeheartedly agree with Kevin's discussion of Matrix. It's really a wonderful book. I was so happy and content and excited the whole time I was reading it. And a lot of the people in the audience have been really excited about the discussion of the musicality of language. I don't know if you guys could see those comments or not as they popped up, but what I realized is that Marie de France's visions gave you like a special opportunity to really go places linguistically. In fact, in those visions, it reminded me of your story, Sir Fleeting, where with the blue butterflies, right? These things that, I don't know if that makes sense or not. I teach Sir Fleeting at least once a year. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, no, I love that story. If you guys don't know the story, it's one of the few short stories that can demonstrate a person's entire life in about 20 pages, right? So it's wonderful in that craft sense, but there's a scene where thousands of blue butterflies descend upon Buenos Aires, and of course, everyone is moved by them. And this is the same thing that happens in these moments with Marie, or at least in her mind, and then seemingly in the minds of the nuns who she sort of speaks the visions to. Could you talk about what it was like to write a vision, a religious vision, in terms of, especially in terms of, the comments we were making earlier about musicality and all that sort of thing?
Sure. So here's the wackiest thing about this book is that I tried very hard to not write anything that wasn't at least intimated in the historical record. So obviously there's never been an abbey with an enormous earthwork labyrinth built around it, but I did find in the historical record lots of mentions of abbeys sort of apocryphally. But in terms of the visions, I went back to all of my favorite mystics, medieval mystics, because I love them so desperately. I find them so interesting, the way that they were able to, through ephemeral, very abstract things like visions from God and language, were able to create really concrete power for themselves in a place where they were not readily given power. So I thought that the sort of the seizing of power through the abstract was in some ways, I think, in less bloodthirsty terms, what Kevin and I are trying to do in our lives. Like at least not power, but like attention, which is power nowadays. So what I did was I went back to all of my Hildegard von Bingens and all of my Marjorie Kemps and all of my Julian of Norwiches and probably a dozen others, and read their visions and began to understand the symbology, because it's like the symbolism is so potent. And I think that's something that I've been alive to since day one. And of course, the Buenos Aires butterflies borrowed from Gabriel Garcia Marquez for sure. And so I was sort of bringing the symbolism from his work into my own work there. And I was bringing the symbolism from the mystics into my own work here. And so I think it's drawing on other people's almost the lingua franca of the moment in order to invest what I'm writing about with like the authority of the past in some ways, sort of steeping it in the past. So of course the red rose means something very particular. The pelican pecking out its own heart means something very particular in medieval iconography. So all of these things I sort of had to research and put into my own visions. But it was, I think I would ask Kevin this question too, but the only time I know that I'm on the right path as a writer is when I feel just profound joy sort of surrounding the thing that I'm doing at the moment. And so bringing in these ideas of the medieval mystics brought me such deep joy. I felt like that was a clue that I was doing something right. How about you, Kevin? Do you write out of joy, like or seeking of joy?
It's funny. This book, The Ghost Variations, was written in a quest for fun and pleasure. I mean, and there are all sorts of, terrors and pains that befall the characters in this book. But I hope that there is a sense of joy behind it. And I wanted it to feel like 100 pieces of candy, basically. 100 pieces of metaphysical candy or pataphysical candy, really, is what it was. I guess some of my books have not. I think that if you want your book to kind of carry a feeling and present it to your readers, you can't fake that feeling while you're writing it. Like, your sentences will bend false, and like they work in such minute ways that really, in order to understand whether they're conveying what you want them to convey, you have to be, in a Stanislavskian way, sort of experiencing the feelings along with your characters. And a lot of my books have been rooted in grief in one way or another. And it brought grief to me in some ways to write them too. And I can't figure out whether it was the grief from my life that I was feeding into these books, or the grief from these books that was kind of affecting the shape of my life. But I mean, The Ghost Variation was in part a way of trying to counteract that. What can I produce if I try to write out of a different sentiment? And how might it change me as a human being? Which is not to say that those earlier books were kind of missing the sort of joy you're talking about. But it was often an aesthetic joy that was wedded to kind of the difficulties of experience.
Yeah, I was about to say, because that exists as well, right? There's joy in the struggle as well. And sometimes when it's really, really hard, that's when you feel most alive in your actual corporeal being, right? Yeah. And which is very strange, but it gives you something to fight, maybe. I don't know, but I know this feeling, right? And I know the grief, but I also know that you persist in looking at it day in and day out for a reason. And what that reason may not be fun, right? Or it may not be joy in any pleasurable sense, but maybe it's sort of ecstatic in the way that maybe medieval martyrs would have experienced ecstasy in pain, right? There's also ecstasy in pain, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a prophetic tone. And I mean it, I guess, more in the E.M. Forster sense of sort of a music that captures you. That is a part of many of the books that I love the best, and I try to make a part of my own books. And it's certainly a part of your work, and most certainly a part of Matrix.
I love that you looped it back to music. You're so brilliant. That's so good. I say,
well, it feels like we've got a minute left, so it seemed like this was maybe the ideal way of
you
indicating.
Did it.
I want to mention just before things are brought to an end, that like for anybody who's listening, like Wordsworth, which is handling many of the book sales for the literary festival, is my hometown bookstore, and I'm there all the time. So if it's not hard to get a copy of this book, but if you want an inscribed copy in pandemic circumstances, it hasn't been easy. However, if you order it through them, it's easy for me to go by the bookstore and inscribe it for any purpose, and they can ship it off to you if you're not local.
Also, we love our local independent bookstores. Please, please, please buy books from them. We love them so much. Especially now, buy them now for if you Christmas or Hanukkah or Christmas, Kwanzaa or whatever you celebrate, because supply chain issues are off the hook this year. So, yep.
Yeah, and Wordsworth says that they do in fact have a certain number of signed copies of both books in stock now. So go get them, friends. We, I think, have come to 2 p.m. Thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation. You guys, you didn't need me. You guys were awesome.
We did too. You were amazing. It was so good to see you there.
Kevin's a veteran. Anyway, what a pleasure to be able to sit and listen to you guys talk about books and your writing. Thank you so very much. Good luck, Lauren. National Book Award this time. Or
I could be the Susan Lucci of the book world. That's fine too.
That's not so bad. Yeah.
All right, everybody. I think we have to say goodbye. Take care. Good luck to you both. And Kevin, I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Kevin.
Bye. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.